In our channel lately, we've been talking a bit about interrupts.
Today, we do a deep dive into the subject. I am Chris.
And I'm Matt.
Welcome to Roleplay Chat.
We are two game masters who just can't stop talking about role-playing games.
And today we talk about interrupts, something we both like to use and we really love.
Something we also tried talking about for several hours in another video, but it didn't really work out. So we love you guys so much, we're trying it again.
Let's do it.
It's a little bit unorthodox. We don't usually do this, but I think the short video I'm going to end up editing and putting out first before this. And if that works out well, I might just keep, we might just keep doing that. But yeah, so for this time, the short video is going to go out first. And we're going to, for the long video, as always, have kind of a open-ended discussion about interrupts. I wonder if, Chris, it might make sense to pull our definition.
Yeah, the definition, I think, really help us to start the conversation. So the definition we came up with, even though interrupts are not our invention, but that's our definition of it, it's when the GM brings forward a situation or a complication that redirects the party's focus. Often it is on plan and forces the party to reassess their priorities. And the main use, I would say, of these interrupts, at least for us, is to control the pace of the game.
Yeah, so, we usually find ourselves, or I usually find myself using interrupts the most when players are taking too long, they're talking to an NPC forever, and they don't stop asking them the same questions, kind of thing. That's when I like to spring them onto my players.
So we have a definition. We're talking already about when we use them. I think that's going to be one of the first thing we're going to take a deep dive in. But first, I feel like maybe it's still not clear about what exactly it is.
Okay.
So maybe we should just do a basic example just to start to make sure we understand what is this situation complication that redirects the party's focus.
Okay, sure.
So that's maybe I'll take an example we've already talked about in Blood and Betrayal. What example should we take?
I mean, I have an example that I like to use, but it's not from Blood and Betrayal.
No,
and arguably it might not be the very best interrupt out there. But I like to think of the example where and I steal this example from the cartoon show Avatar, which I used to love watching, and I still think it's a very, very good show. But I digress. Basically, in Avatar, there was this reoccurring character who was a cabbage farmer, and he had a little cart, and he'd bring it to market, and his cabbages his cart would always break down, and his cabbages would always roll around and go on the floor, and he'd always scream, "Oh, my cabbages!" And to me, that spoke to me. Is that's an interrupt. You've got my players in the market hustling with a blacksmith for a better deal on their sword, and they won't leave him alone. Well, I'm gonna make the cabbage guy drop all of his cabbages, freak out. Maybe some kids broke his wheel, and now it diverts the attention of the players towards the old man. That's my very simple example of an interrupt. I don't know if you have one that you want to pull from Blood and Betrayal, Chris. I mean, it might be better.
Sure. Maybe we haven't talked about this one yet, but one of the one I used was I really liked. It was I didn't expect the group to stay a long time in a tavern, and I wanted to move on, or I wanted to bring something interesting to change the situation because it was getting a little bit stale, and I didn't know how to make it interesting. So what I did is I took an action that someone did in the past. I would say something prohibited. And I brought people that would challenge that character. Be like, are you the one who who hurted my brother? Something like that. And a group of thugs. And then they have to interact with them. Either tell them, no, it's not me. Or maybe engage in a fight. Or anyway, interact with that situation the way they want. So I bring forward a situation just to change the pace. And something, because we were saying it wasn't planned, right? It was just me reacting to the characters, and especially reacting to something they did in the past. So that's something we might talk about a bit more, is using these interrupt to bring back events from the past.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think right now it's probably pretty clear what we mean by interrupts. It's some people use random encounters. It's like a random encounter that has a purpose.
Yeah, and it's almost specific. But I think we'll get more into it as we go along. Unless, you know what, maybe let's talk about it right now, Chris.
Yeah.
Why isn't it a random encounter? To you, why is it different?
To me, a random encounter is first, usually we talk about fight.
Okay.
But even if we generalize to social random encounters, I don't like the word random.
Mm-hmm.
Random to me means it can put pretty much anywhere, anytime.
It's very flexible.
Very flexible, and that has pros, like it's very flexible.
Yeah.
But that has definitely cons for me because I try to make everything advance the story. And to me, to have just a random thing happen,
Yeah.
I have a hard time making it part of not even the main plot, but just part of the character progression. I would much rather have someone from one of the characters' past that maybe in the main plot doesn't have a space for it, but now that there's a gap to fill, because that's when I use interrupt. When there's a gap, I can feel it. As a game master, I need to be careful and to feel if my players are slowing down and leaving a gap for me to throw an interrupt.
Yeah,
And that's something I like to do. So it's not random. Would you agree with my assessment?
Yeah, I think the random element is really what to me makes interrupts more interesting and different from random encounters. And actually the idea of an interrupt, obviously I heard it somewhere else. I actually can't remember where I heard it, but I remember hearing it and being like, that's kind of like what I do when I look at a random encounter table. Because, before I even fathomed the idea of an interrupt, I used random encounter tables, but I used them without rolling dice. I would look at the random encounter and be like, okay, this looks appropriate given the situation, the players, the kind of reaction I suspect my players might have to make them engage with this element of the table. And then from there, I worked on it. I looked up interrupts, listened to podcasts, or I can't remember exactly where I found it. And then obviously now, we've had these discussions and we've elaborated on this concept far more beyond the idea of just looking at a table and picking something.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think that the first step of simplicity is a random. You roll, you take it, you run it. Then it's looking at a table to make a choice. And I'm not saying it's superior, but it is more complex. It's situational. And then after that is actually looking. Maybe you see a group of bandits are a good example. You see a group of bandits attack the players. Okay, you could run it like that. You could choose it, or you could even, when you see it, be like, oh, that's actually very appropriate. I could say that those bandits are the one from 3 games ago. Well, that then for me, it's almost an interrupt, right? It is because you tied in something else. So for us, well, for me at least, I like to prepare interrupts that are specific to my campaign, players, location, plot, everything.
Yeah.
So how many interrupts would you say you have planned at any given moment, like in average?
For the most part, I say I have, if I'm prepared, I'll have 3 or 4.
Okay.
If I'm unprepared, I might have none, to be honest.
I mean, it's possible to come up with interrupts on the fly too, right?
Yeah.
It's just that if we want to link it to the purpose and everything, it might be a bit
on
harder.
average, a couple, I'd say. And usually it's, I don't want to get ahead of myself in our conversation, but usually it's to reap the benefits of something like an unanswered question from before. That's usually where I'll note something down, and then a few games later I'll go back to that. But yeah, okay, so I think that covers the differences, at least I think so.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
So let's keep digging into the interrupts and try to figure out what we like most. I think interrupts are a pretty versatile tool. They can achieve a lot of different things, sometimes all at once. So let's kick it off with usually have a list of prompts, prepared questions.
Mm-hmm.
So let's kick it off with just, Chris, when you like, how do you know it's time to use an interrupt? What do you use them for?
Good question. So normally when I plan a session, I have a beginning and an end.
Yep.
I rarely have a middle. I usually have, okay, we're going to start here. Here's where I want to bring them.
Okay.
Or where they could end up. Usually I would use interrupt whenever I'm in a situation in the middle that I don't know what to do next. So either...
So like all the time?
Pretty much. So if I don't see where they're going, I might throw an interrupt to... So we had a pace video where we said something about starting high with high energy. Then sometimes you have a bit of a low and then finishing high. We talk about like having high stakes.
Yeah,
right?
and so if that's something that you want to know more about, we're going to link it up here. I think is it here?
No, it's here.
It's me. It's over me. It's over here.
Here. So sometimes I'm close to the end and I'm like, I haven't achieved that and I won't achieve that. So an interrupt might be a way to bring the stakes forward up. I mean, without necessarily reaching the point, like without pushing something that should not be blah blah blah. I have a hard time expressing myself.
No, I understand what you're trying to say.
Put something to raise the stakes without
forcing the main plot.
Exactly.
Much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool.
And so that's one way. That's one thing. And the other main thing is when I explained, it's when they do something, my players do something I didn't expect. They put themselves in a situation I did not foresee. I have some little interrupts in my back pocket. I pull one out to make sure that where they went is also interesting and is also significant to them. So if the characters, I don't know how they're going to reach a certain point and they go investigate at the Temple of Sigmar, then maybe I have something an interrupt that fits there and I can make them going there that much more interesting and not just like rolling a die and then I want them to leave because I didn't prepare. No, I have an interrupt it's good to keep interrupt flexible for that reason. And then you pull it out and then it's like, oh my God, he planned me going to the Temple of Sigmar, but I didn't. It's just, I made it so that it seems like something was waiting for them, an adventure was waiting for them.
How, like to kind of keep digging this in more, how specific would this example be? Like, let's say you did plan an interrupt that you would spring out and put into the Temple of Sigmar when the players are going there to, I don't know, speak to a priest, like a senior priest, and the senior priest isn't there. The interrupt, would it be to the point where you're saying, okay, this interrupt needs to happen in the Temple of Sigmar? Or would it be a little bit more loose than that? Like, in a more academic environment, X might happen.
Yeah, very good question. I think it depends on your player. I have a priest of Sigmar. So for me, it's not really far-fetched to think that at one point they're going to be at the Temple of Sigmar. Okay. So planning an interrupt for that situation is still like I know I'm going to use it at one point. If there would not be a priest of Sigmar, then I would not be as specific. So I have a wizard.
Yeah.
I'll plan something related to wizards. I have a priest, I might relate something to priests. But if I don't have that, maybe it's going to be, like you said, more academic, more, okay, when they do research, they find a book, and that book, there's that information that has nothing to do with the main plot, but that could be interesting to them.
Okay.
That's a great interrupt. Well,
it is an interrupt.
It is an interrupt, yeah. It could be great depending on the information, right? But it's an interrupt.
And players love looking at books.
My players do, actually.
I don't know what it is about bookshelves. Players, you put a bookshelf somewhere, they beeline for that thing. I'm like, screw saving the princess.
What's the first book? What's the second book? What's the third book? Yeah, so I think it really depends on your group, like how specific you want to be.
Okay.
So if you have a really academic group, doing academic interrupts are not a problem.
Well, that's interesting to me. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised because you tend to be very focused on the players. something that I'm learning by doing this with you. For me, when I'm using my interrupts, usually the thing to answer my own question.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I was gonna ask anyway. So
Usually, it's more related to location and when I really feel it getting boring, or like I plan interrupts, especially lately, when I suspect that the pace is going to start to slow down.
yeah,
One thing that I've been really focusing in on lately is travel. I know that travel can get boring,
yeah,
especially in the Rising Tide campaign where, you're pirates, you're on a ship, you have to travel distances at a significant amount of frequency. Like, it's pretty frequent that you're going to travel around. I wanted to think of interrupts that would be specific to you're on your boat, you're at sea, what might happen in this environment if things start to slow down.
yeah.
And then I would take into consideration, the plot and elements of the characters as well. But my singular focus, if I had to pick only one thing, it was usually that. It was, okay, they're traveling, I should probably have an interrupt. Okay, they're in the tavern and they keep talking to the bartender. Okay, I should probably have an interrupt for that kind of situation. And it was usually more situation based to revitalize the energy at the table and kind of shift the I guess the attention is the wrong word, but like just to give something different. Instead of just, okay, we're traveling. Okay, you're at the next spot. Okay, well, let's travel a little bit, and then I'm going to toss in some roleplay, or I'm going to toss in some combat, just to spice it up.
Yeah, I think that's a very powerful way to use interrupts, and that's one of the. So what you're saying is to change the pillars of, like, control the number of time you're doing a social versus a combat or exploration, or
ultimately that's what I'm saying. It's to kind of, and this is something that we've talked about before in the previous filming of this, but we came to the conclusion that interrupts are powerful tools when you want to switch the pillar of your game. So if you're in social and you want to force it into combat, well, you could have an interrupt that is not forcing combat, but enabling combat to happen. Same thing with the other pillars. If you're exploring, okay, you want to enable some roleplay, well, you toss in an interrupt that would enable that.
And a good thing with interrupts too is I feel like it gives the players more option. So if let's say you're a game master that's really railroady, linear, not
in a bad sense.
Not in a bad sense, but very you put an objective forward, and usually the players go for that. Putting an interrupt is actually a good way to do side quests.
Yeah.
And like in the last Blood and Betrayal, I mentioned the fact that it was an improvised game. I had an objective. They had to go to a mine to get mithril, short version. But on the way, I've put the crossed.
Yeah, they crossed paths.
They crossed path with a caravan of nobles that were going to a harvest festival. The players hid in the bushes and just let them pass, and that felt fine because the players were really about exploration and combat, not really about social. But let's say I had a player that was really into social and was like, oh, let's do it, like, let's have a festival.
Like me.
Like you maybe you would have been like, oh, I'll go get out of my bush and go talk to that noble and try to figure out and then interact with them. So then it means that the players have really you give them agency, right? So so by, let's say your game is really about exploration and fight, and you want to give them an option of having something more social, then that's a good way to do an interrupt, because interrupt can be avoided, right? You put a situation forward, like we said, you need to reassess their priorities, but maybe their first priority is still the good one.
Yeah, the other thing that they were already doing, and you're just throwing a screwball at them, and they don't want to have anything to do with it. And I think you're right, that is a powerful part of the interrupts. It's called an interrupt, but it shouldn't be viewed, I don't think, or personally, I don't think it should be used to
block.
To say, stop paying attention to this. Look at this. It's no. You're doing this. Hey, what about this thing? Do you wanna come look at this? No, that's fine. Like, keep on going. And
we saw that first game in Blood and Betrayal. Everybody, like, there was a bell ringing to bring everybody to the marketplace. Well, Otis, the sneaky guy, the rogue, just was like, I don't care.
Yeah,
I'll just stay back there. And then that created other things. But it's, if you're shopping and you hear fighting outside the walls of the city, you might be like, I'll go fight. Or you might be, well, I'm actually looking for tomatoes, so I don't really care about the battle outside, right?
Okay, so I think that covers that. I think how we use interrupts is different, but I can not sympathize, but I can understand, and I'm sure I've used it for the same purposes as you, Chris. Let's keep digging our little hole of interrupts, and maybe talk about, what was your favorite interrupt? Do you have an interrupt that or maybe not your favorite, that might be hard, but one that resonates where you're like, when I did this interrupt, it achieved the definition, or it stuck for some reason. Maybe it didn't achieve the definition fully, but it stuck.
I have one in my head, but I kind of mentioned it already, so I'm looking for a second one.
Okay, sorry.
Well, you know what? Let's maybe give more details and the behind the scene on this interrupt. So I have one of my characters, and it's gonna come up in the Blood and Betrayal. Yeah. Maybe should I mention it right away, or should we keep it for?
Okay, well, I think we should mention it. If you have been following the Blood and Betrayal series and you don't want to have this spoiled for you, maybe skip ahead 2-3 minutes.
Sure.
What do you think?
Yeah, we can put the time tag.
Yeah,
is that a thing?
Yeah, we'll say pre-spoiler, after spoiler, or something like that. Here we are making more work for us to do. Yeah. We must really like you guys.
My example is that one of my game, one of the wizards, because in the future I have more than one. One of the wizard, a fire wizard, passed a peasant, and even though he was friendly, showed him his magic and lit a flame, and it really scared the peasant. But then when he realized that, he gave him money, and he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I scared you. I'm on your side." The thing is, in the Warhammer universe and the location they are right now, people are afraid of magic. There's controlled magic, but it's still, people are afraid of it. So I told my wizards, including Diedrich, I told them, make sure you don't show your powers in front of people for no good reason, because there might be consequences. So when he did that, I wrote a little note to have consequences, right? That's why for me it's a good interrupt. It's like I wrote on a piece of paper, confront Novak about his use of magic. Okay. So a couple, maybe 2, 3, 4 games later, I don't even remember. They were in a bar. That's the example I mentioned before. So they were in a bar, and the thing is, the group of thugs came in and asked that peasant. That peasant was behind them, and asked him, is that the guy who used magic? And he's like, yeah, it's him. Don't hurt me. As if he was pushed to give that information. And then the group of thugs confronted this fire wizard called Novak about it. And the reason I really like this interrupt is, first, it helped me have consequences where I didn't have really space for it in my main plot. But because it was slowing down, it was a good use of it. The other one is because lately that player had been playing had taken rash decision, especially in combat. So I wanted to test him outside of combat. I basically wanted to test it's hard to tell, the player or the character, to see if they would start a fight in a tavern using fire magic. That would have been really bad. But no, the character was like, no, I'm not the guy. Here's some beer, and did some charm, and he finally managed to have them on their side. For me, it was a situation that really showed the improvement of the character. Show how he evolved from just using magic anytime, anywhere, to actually using his silver tongue to get what he wants.
Cool.
So maybe it's a long version of that story, but I feel like you need to know what happened, right? To
appreciate it.
To appreciate it. So, yeah. How about you?
Welcome back, people who didn't want to be spoiled. For me, there was one example, and I like it in part because I really also kind of use interrupts just as I usually focus on lore and exposition and story elements. In this example, I had a group of adventurers. They were out. They had just finished a small quest fighting bandits in a cave / building hideaway thing, and they were running away. They were tired. They were tired of fighting, and they decided to make camp outside before going back to the village, which I thought was maybe a little bit of a reckless decision. And for those of you who use random encounter tables, you might be like, okay, this is where I'm going to roll my random encounter table. Now, I had planned to have a small rat man shopkeeper type of character, like almost like a Skaven from the Warhammer universe. I don't know if they exist actually in the D&D world, but it was like I kind of statted him like a were-rat, basically. And I told myself, okay, this is going to be... And I created this character because I knew that one of the players had a fondness for, like, wild animals.
Okay.
She likes animals, and I kind of catered it to her as a person, not so much to her player character.
Okay.
But I figured if they hear an animal whimpering, she's going to want to do something about it. So, and it was dark at night. She was guarding. It was her turn to guard. And I made a trap, like, clack sound. Ooh. And then the whimpering of an animal. And I'm like, okay, she's going to go. Like, for sure she's going to go save this thing. Even if she has 2 HP left, she's going to go save this thing. And she did. And it allowed me...
your players.
It allowed me to... she saved the animal, which was a speaking rat, who talked to her and explained to her how grateful he was. And he gave her a discount card to his, chain of traveling shops. And it was just this fun interaction that allowed me to expose them to kind of this tidbit of fun lore that then, like, I had the intention of bringing back. We stopped playing shortly after, so I never got the opportunity to, but it was kind of my introduction to this traveling band of rat shopkeepers that I was going to use at other intervals throughout the game, in part to help them if they ran out of supplies or whatnot. It was kind of my excuse to...
And they had a free coupon, right?
And they had a free coupon, so why not? But it was a lot of fun, and it kind of allowed me to do the things I like, which was showcase the world, showcase this exposition without it feeling like exposition. It really felt like the character, the player went and made this decision, and this was like her reward for doing the right thing, quote unquote.
I think you're touching something else that's very interesting, the fact that using interrupt can be a good way to show about lore and to do exposition in a really, I wouldn't say controlled, but also like organic way. So you just don't tell the players things. You show them using something that, again, it's not on the main line, the main plot, but you create those ratmen who are...
just want to give you coupons.
Just want to give you coupons.
But no, and you're right, Chris. And we keep talking about these things, engaging your players, lore, using interrupts to... talking too fast. Using interrupts to showcase lore, changing pillars and whatnot. By all means, this isn't the only way to do that.
No.
But I think the more we talk about these things, the more, to me, it becomes apparent that this is so much more than a random encounter, right? It's you've intentionally, or at least we've intentionally imbued the interrupt with these elements to seek out the player's interest, to seek out lore, to change pillars, to make consequences happen. These are things that if you look at the short video, you'll notice that basically these are the things that we're telling you to try to do, right?
It's we're giving example and we're talking, and it goes organically to those aspect of interrupts and how it can really elevate your game. And I mean that's how I try to use them to fill gaps that otherwise would feel a little bit empty, and really using them in a way that's optimal. And that's when I try to fit, like you said, try to fit lore, try to fit character development. Often if a player gives me another thing that inspires sometimes interrupts are when a player comes to me between games, is like, oh, I would like my character to have I don't know, a special hat, maybe like this, or maybe it's like I want my character to develop in this way. Then maybe if I don't have a space in it for my main plot, and I can make space for it, but let's say we're concentrating on someone else's story right now, maybe an interrupt is a good way to start the process, or even just give something like
that's
to the
making
player.
me think, like, because in role-playing games this always happens, or not always. You can find ways around it, but often some characters are going to be more interested in the quest that's presented than others. And maybe now that you say that, having an interrupt for each of your players in your back pocket could be a good way to bring back in, and honestly I've never thought of this before, but to bring back in a player who's kind of clocking out a little bit, because maybe it's not their type of environment, maybe because their player character honestly has no business at the School of Magic, but they have to go into the School of Magic because the wizard really needs to, and it's critical for the plot. Or not the plot, but for that character's development. Yeah,
and if the player didn't tell me anything about where they wanted to go, sometimes I try to have an interrupt that would be just tailored to his or her skills or aspects, or like if you're using D&D, ideals, bond. So something that's specific to that character. So exactly, well, like you said, but you did it with the player. Yeah. Like, but if one of the character would be like had a sensitive spot for little creatures, then that's perfect, right? It's the player feels engaged, but maybe another character would not care and would get to the trap and just finish off the creature, and then maybe it's not as interesting. There's not the social aspect of it. So that's the main. I think now that we've talked about it, the main use I do, like, it's centered around the player, and I try to have one per player. Sometimes I don't have one because you don't really need. Like, sometimes the player just needs to take a backseat, but yeah.
Okay.
Do you have another?
I mean, some of this I think we touched upon. Here I have, what do you consider to be the elements of interrupts? But I think we touched upon that already, just by the virtue of our answers.
Maybe I have something I've noted, something about how I plan. And when I mean I plan, I don't want to go through the steps necessarily, because we've already done it in the short video. I think it's not steps, but it's aspects that can create a good interrupt. But something I'd like to mention is the fact that some interrupts are, like we said, are totally improvised.
Like Cabbage Man,
maybe, depending. Some of my interrupts are actually the way I control how long a session is. So I would say, like I said, I have the beginning and I have the end. And sometimes I think, okay, this is going to take an hour, this is going to take an hour, and I have an hour in between. But let's say they go super fast.
Yeah.
Then maybe I want to put an interrupt. But the other way I do it, normally what I do is I plan for 4 or 5 hours for a game that's supposed to be 3 hours and a half.
Yeah.
And the thing I'm going to remove is the interrupt. So there's an interrupt that's built in to make sure that I have a full session. But whenever the players go too slowly, I would remove it. So it's something that I can actually just...
You slide it in and out.
Yeah, slide it in and out. So these interrupts that I have in my back pocket, sometimes it's like, okay, I'm ready to use them.
Yeah.
But I'm probably not going to use them. So for me,
that's interesting.
It is still an interrupt, because if it's not necessary to the main plot, if you can remove it, for me, it's not really part of the story, right? but still it's not random. You still have the purpose aspect of it because it still adds something.
Yeah.
But if you want a story to move forward, you can remove it. I don't know. Does that trigger something in your?
I mean, I don't know. I've never really thought of interrupts in that way, in the way of like telling myself, okay, I'm gonna do an interrupt here. To me, that just feels like it's just part of the planning of the session as optional elements of the game, or you know, like usually when I'm planning an environment, I plan a handful of little things peppered into the environment that I'm like, they might just bypass all of this, they might not, but if they interact with all these things, I have things to do exposition, or I have things to hook onto a new event, like to hook to them a new adventure for them to follow, or lore, or a role-playing, skill-based, like chatty challenge. These are things that I kind of have planned in already. Although, maybe a way to save time, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe I should just not do that. Think of an interrupt that would grab the attention of my players. That might be an interesting solution. I don't know. I have to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think my example is maybe stretching the definition of an interrupt a little bit because it is so planned. But for me, it's about like sometimes I do terrain, sometimes I prep maps. I rarely draw maps on the fly lately. I used to more. Now I'm maybe, like we said, we prepare a lot.
Yeah,
so
maybe too much.
I'm often overly prepared, and a way to always be prepared for me is to have this interrupt to control again me with my control to control where the attention goes if I lose it.
Okay.
Right. So sometimes I will have an encounter, and by encounter I mean it could be social, could be an NPC, could be anything. And if I see like I don't have the time, I'm just gonna scrap it and keep it for another time. Right.
That's
so
cool.
Is that an interrupt? I don't know. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just normal planning where you adjust to the pacing. But for me, it's really a block
that definition a little bit
that I can remove.
Yeah. So I mean, you talking about how you plan your interrupts makes me think of how I plan mine. And obviously, again, I'm not going to go into the details of all the elements I considered. That's what the short video is for. So if you want to know that, we'd encourage you to go check it out. But what I've been doing lately so that I can remember my interrupts, because that's also part of my problem sometimes, is I have started writing tables of interrupts. Because I found myself looking at random encounter tables and picking and choosing them. So I created a table of, let's say 20 possible interrupts. But they've been categorized in a way that's like, okay, if they're at C, these are the ones that I can use. If they're past a certain point, like they are now aware of something, or something in the calendar has happened that they're not aware of, these 5 interrupts might happen. If they're in this place or that place, like you guys get the idea. Yeah. So it's kind of like categorizing them, so it's easier for me to be like, okay, this is where we are. I look through my notes, boom, that's the one that I want to use for this situation. And then this is probably something that only I would try to do, but I put like smiley faces or sad faces beside them for like the mood that I hope this instills. So if it's like, they've just been through a lot, I don't want to give them more hard stuff.
I remember you saying something about that.
So I'm going to put like a silly interrupt. So that's like that narwhal thing that came. You remember that thing that was
yeah.
Like,
that's interesting, and that's something I know you care a lot about. How if everybody's more like down, you want to bring the energy back up.
Get the energy back. So I would come up with like, okay, they're gonna find a casket of really expensive alcohol, and all the characters are gonna get drunk. So that's gonna be the intro.
I must say this is not in my mind when I plan any of this, but it's a good thing to keep in mind.
I mean, if we're gonna say interrupts change pillars, it might as well also change the mood, right? That's what I don't know.
Yeah, but you're really good at having characters that are colorful and that really like we laugh just by presenting certain situation. And like you have your game has humor in it that sometimes I think as the game master I lack, and as a player I like.
Okay.
But because in my game there's still humor, but I'm usually not the one bringing it. It's usually the player.
Us, yeah. We force up on you.
No, I like it. It's just like it's not my. To me, I run a game that humor is not my concern.
Yeah.
But I like to have it in my game. It's just the players bring it. So if my players would be super boring and no humor at all, maybe I would worry about that. But I don't need to right now, right? So. But you touched something that was really interesting. You said something about on a certain like if in my calendar something happened, I might use it. And for me, this is also it resonates with me because I usually have a plot, a villain plot that the villain is trying to do with different objectives, and depending on what the players do, they might cause delay, or they might stop it, or they might. So for me, it's very interesting because if they do not deal with something, an interrupt is a great way to show
this
consequences.
is the consequence. Yeah.
And to be fair, you could plan that interrupt. Like it could not be an interrupt. It could be just you start a game and that's the quest. He sends you on this quest.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of sometimes keeping again. It's about having cards in your hand as the game master, and some of them
offer versatility.
Exactly. And this interrupt is like I hold this card. And whenever I feel like it's a good moment, I'll play it.
And in this example, I'm not saying let the bad guy do everything single-handedly without anybody stopping it. Like
obviously you could stop whatever you want. You're the game master.
You're the game master, but it's using interrupts, using interrupts in conjunction with the actions your players are taking, the story that's being told at the table to offer options, offer different priorities. Basically. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about for this? I know. Whoa, excuse me, my voice just cracked like crazy. I know in the short video and in our previous video that you're never gonna see, haha. We talked a little bit about seeding.
Yeah.
I think we might want to talk about that here. But before I ask you how you use interrupts and seeding together, maybe it's worth briefly talking about what seeding is. What do you think?
So I'll mention it. Maybe you should start about how you use it. So think about it while I try to explain seeding. So seeding is something. Well, for me, I heard about it through How to Be a Great GM, and I kind of made my own idea, and we talked about it. So seeding for me is when you have a situation that you've put in front of the players that you don't really know why it's there. So you put something in front of them and you have, at this point, no idea what it's referring to. So for example, one of my game with my in-laws, the only game we played, although they loved it, I decided because I improvised that something was stolen and the place of the object that was stolen was a perfectly placed black feather. I did not know why that feather was there, but I tied it to the plot and then the advance and resolved this, and it all made sense. But at the moment, I did not know why it was there. So I think interrupts and using seeding is they go very well together. So so let's say something is slowing down.
Just to chime in. So interrupts obviously, sorry, not interrupts. Seeding is something that I think we both agree it can be far more complex than this explanation Chris just gave. But in an effort of saving time and it's an effort of maybe saving content for another episode, we're not going to talk too much more about seeding in terms of its definition. But I can say that I think Chris and I are on the same page that we're going to do an episode on seeding at some point. Yep. If it's something you're very interested in, please reach out to us, comment, or email us, or reach out to us on Twitter and tell us hey, talk to us about seeding. We want to hear your perspectives, blah, blah, blah. We'd love to do that.
Yeah, so it's about putting an object that
You don't know what
really,
it's gonna
well,
be.
maybe not an object, a situation you don't know, and then using it later. So it's you seed, and then you grow, and then you reap, right? So it might take different steps. So that plan metaphor comes from How to Be a Great GM.
For me, when I'm using my interrupts in relation to seeding, I like to use interrupts to reap the benefits of things that I've seeded before. You know, because I'm doing a lot of exposition in my games, I'm just name dropping places, people, things, factions, and my players are like, "What's this? What's that? Who's this?" And they're like, to the point where there's maybe too much of it. And
Yeah, but what's cool is that the players will grab the one they want, right?
exactly. So they grab the one they want, and they kind of push towards a direction, and maybe ignore a seed that I planted. Well, this is where my interrupt can come in and say, hey, remember that faction that you heard about 2, 3, 4, 5 games ago? Here's an interrupt related to that. And it kind of has this effect to make the interrupt feel like it's still part of everything.
Yeah.
You know, a negative I find to random encounters is that they can feel very isolated. Interrupts too, I think, if they're not done with enough effort, can feel a little isolated. But if you're going to go and use something that you mentioned a couple of games ago, you can really reap the benefits, have a cool interrupt, and then your player's like, wow, okay, I remember that. I remember that evil thieves guild that, you know, we heard mentioned in the streets. Well, now there's a thief who pickpocketed this old lady, and we're gonna go help the old lady, and it's the same guild. Cool, like it's fun.
And seeding, again, we won't go into the details, but can be used in multiple ways through the main campaign and everything. But it's really well suited for interrupts, for the reasons you showed. And also, an interrupt could be just introducing the seed, also. And it's you can see that in this situation, it's easy to link to lore and exposition too, because you want to reuse something that maybe seemed basic and with no consequences, and bring it back in a way that is relevant to the well, for me it's to the players, it might be to the location, it might be to the plot, it might be to whatever you want.
Cool. Let's quickly wrap up. If you want to reach out to us, you can do so by contacting us on Twitter. That's roll_play_chat.
And we have an email, that's contactroleplaychat@gmail.com. I don't know if you would say the email if I could say the Twitter. No, I know the Twitter, but I'm saying it would throw me off, so don't do it.
Okay, we'll just stick with this. We've got a ritual now. It's done.
Yeah, contactroleplaychat@gmail.com.
And actually, speaking of Twitter, very quickly, I know I said we're running long, but I've been using Twitter a lot lately. I love, like, at least a couple times a day. So I encourage you, and not only to talk about the podcast, like just general RPG stuff, polls and etc. So if that's something you want to be a part of, it's a lot of fun.
You're doing a great job.
Thanks.
Sometime I'll chime in a little bit, but yeah.
So yeah, I'd love to see you say, hey, I watched this episode, or if you have feedback, you can send us a direct message. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And yeah, that's everything I have to say for today, Chris.
That's all, Matt.
Let's call it a chat.